Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
We open with the exciting news that Israeli hostage Qaid Farhan al-Qadi from the Bedouin community, who was kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th, has been rescued from his captors in Gaza and returned to Israel. Al-Qadi, who is 52 years old, is a father of 11 who lived near Rahat and worked in a packing house in Kibbutz Magen, from where he was kidnapped. It was reported that he was rescued in a Hamas tunnel where he had previously been held with other captives and was rescued in a complex IDF operation. This is the first hostage to be rescued from a tunnel. Al-Qadi was taken to Soroka Hospital to undergo testing, and initial reports show he is in good health. His return has been met with immense celebration in Israel, as the initial announcement featured moving footage of his family running to greet him at the hospital.
ברוך השם, אנחנו אומרים תודה רבה לכולם, ואני מקווים שלראות אותו בבריאות, ושמחים מאוד שאנחנו מקבלים את הבשורות האלה.
We at ILTV join in the celebrations of welcoming him home and hope to see the return of all our hostages soon. Rescued in Gaza after 327 days in Hamas captivity, former hostage Farhan al-Qadi is reportedly in good health after reuniting with family at Soroka Hospital. The IDF has released some details on the rescue operation, but much remains under censorship so as not to harm other potential rescues. The State of Israel also announced the recovery of the body of Sergeant Shaked Dahan, who was murdered on October 7th during the Hamas massacre. His body was rescued from Hamas by IDF forces in Gaza and returned home. May his memory be blessed. More now from Gaza, from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
The IDF has released few details on the rescue of 52-year-old Farhan al-Qadi from Gaza after nearly 11 months in Hamas captivity. The Bedouin father of 11 was found and rescued by Naval Special Forces and the Yahalom Combat Engineering Unit, deep in a tunnel in South Gaza. The operation was based on precise intelligence. The IDF spokesman ended rumors that al-Qadi managed to escape the tunnel and released a video of the first moments after al-Qadi was found. The army did not know the exact location where al-Qadi was, but had intelligence indicating that there could be hostages nearby. They were operating in the area for a number of days before locating the lone captive.
We cannot go into many details of this special operation, but I can share that Israeli commandos rescued Qaid Farhan al-Qadi from an underground tunnel following accurate intelligence. His medical condition is stable and he will undergo examination in hospital. His family had been waiting 326 days to receive the news they did today. But there are still 108 hostages whose families are still waiting to hear news that their loved ones are home.
The Shayetet 13 commandos and Shin Bet agents began to slowly search a tunnel complex in the area where they discovered al-Qadi. No other hostages or Hamas terrorists were alongside him, and troops did not face any resistance. According to the IDF, al-Qadi was not in the tunnel for the entire 10 months of captivity and was moved around several times. IDF troops questioned al-Qadi en route back to Israel in the hopes that he would be able to provide information on other possible hostages in the area.
Speaking from his bunker in Beirut, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah last night presented an alternative view of retaliatory rocket strikes directed at Israel. The delusional remarks came as the U.S. continued efforts to prevent the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah from spiraling into an all-out war. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Without providing any proof, Nasrallah claimed overwhelming success in yesterday's attack in retaliation for Israel's assassination of Hezbollah Chief of Staff Fuad Shukr at the end of last month in Beirut. Nasrallah claims the strikes went as planned and that Israeli military sites outside of Tel Aviv were struck, and that the retaliation for Shukr's death has now been complete. There were no Hezbollah strikes in central Israel at all.
وتحقق الهدف المقصود فنحن بنعتبر أنه عملية تود على اغتيال الشهيد القائد الحاج محسن سيد محسن واستهداف الضاحية قد تمت. وإذا لم تكن النتيجة في نظرنا كافية فسنحتفظ حاليا لأنفسنا بحق ود حتى وقت آخر.
Earlier, the IDF announced that the army carried out preemptive strikes on Hezbollah launchers that largely prevented a larger attack by the group. IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari said that at least 6 Hezbollah fighters were killed in the Israeli preemptive strikes. There were damages but no injuries caused by some 300 Hezbollah rockets that entered Israeli airspace in the north. The U.S. is attempting to end the escalation. U.S. Chief of Staff General Brown is holding talks with IDF Chief Halevi, with discussions focused on countering the threats from Iran and Hezbollah.
We have been concerned about the conflict escalating into an all-out regional war since October 7th, and we have worked round the clock with partners and allies, moving military assets, engaging in intensive diplomacy, both publicly and privately behind the scenes, to avert that outcome. We continue to work to avert that outcome. And our hope is that the events of last night do not spill out into an escalation that leads to regional war.
Tensions and cross-border attacks are continuing on the northern frontier. The army shot down a drone in the Golan Heights near the Sea of Galilee that had been launched from Syria in what was described as a rare occurrence.
Well, following the escalation by Hezbollah and the response by the IDF, it seems a head-to-head conflict with Hezbollah and the IDF is somewhat inevitable after months of endless attacks on the northern border and over 60,000 displaced Israelis from the northern communities. Here to speak with us now about both sides is Israeli-Lebanese analyst and representative for the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office, Jonathan Elori, himself a refugee from Lebanon who now lives in northern Israel. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, you yourself ended up as an Israeli in part due to this threat of Hezbollah. What can you tell us about the impact of this proxy of the Islamic Republic in Lebanon today?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me, Emily. As I experienced it myself when I was living inside of Lebanon after Israel's withdrawal in May 2000, when Hezbollah started to occupy south of Lebanon, basically taking over and controlling our lives, making sure that we don't speak against them, making sure that we can't even opposition any of their actions inside of South Lebanon. But what happened is that later on, they infiltrated more inside of the Lebanese politics, inside of Lebanese territories, where de facto, Hezbollah today controls some territories in Lebanon that has no Lebanese sovereignty. And this is something that is super crucial for the international community to understand, that at the end of the day, Hezbollah is taking a lot of Lebanese hostage and using them as human shields in order to attack Israel, Israeli citizens. You can say, I fled Hezbollah back in 2001 when I fled to Israel and got shelter in Israel. And today we're facing the same threat that we used to have back then in Lebanon, but now here in Israel.
Now, we've seen approximately 80% of Palestinians support Hamas, even months into this war. How do the Lebanese people feel about Hezbollah as compared to, say, the Palestinians and Hamas?
Yeah, well, the difference is that Lebanon is still somewhat a democratic country, a democratic state, with a vibrant Christian community, Druze community, Sunni Muslim community that not necessarily support Hezbollah, that is a Shia terror group that is affiliated and a proxy of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And what happened is that because of this, you can say, confliction inside of the Lebanese politics, the majority of the Lebanese people today, we can say for sure, doesn't really support Hezbollah's actions, and Hezbollah is basically dragging Lebanon to war. And we can see that on the ground. Latest surveys that showed after the Lebanese elections in 2022 show that more than 1 million people in Lebanon and their political leaders opposed Hezbollah going to war with Israel. You can see also their opposition to what they're having internally inside of Lebanon, taking over Lebanese sovereignty, taking over the Lebanese port. We all remember the port blast in August of 2020, where it led to more than 200 Lebanese people to be killed because of Hezbollah keeping their ammunition in Lebanese territories. And this is something that is super crucial to understand, that a lot of Lebanese oppose Hezbollah's affiliation, that at the end of the day, it doesn't really care for the Lebanese people. And we saw that since October 8th, when Hezbollah started firing rockets towards Israel, a lot of Lebanese went out online to say Lebanon against the war, because they don't support anything that Hezbollah does by dragging Lebanon to war.
Now, you're an Israeli citizen living in the north, and once again, you're impacted by this endless Hezbollah rocket fire as an Israeli now. What do you think the IDF needs to do to secure this border and deter Hezbollah?
First of all, I'm really happy to see that the IDF issued an attack on Hezbollah before they launched their massive attack towards the northern of of Israel, where they tried to kill as many Israelis as possible. And they were able to destroy hundreds of missiles before they were even launched towards Israel. And this is something that is super important to understand. At the end of the day, the IDF is the Israeli Defense Forces, and it makes everything in its power in order to protect its citizens. And I do believe that it will continue to do so as much as possible, because this is its job and it's doing it in the highest way possible. But also it's important to understand that at the end of the day, what Hezbollah is doing is not only targeting Israeli civilians, they're targeting our defense systems, because they're not able to actually hit many civilians as they wanted, because that Israel really put a lot of emphasis and a lot of effort and a lot of funding towards its defense systems that protects us as Israelis. And this is something that a lot of Lebanese are seeing it also, and kind of questioning what Hezbollah did throughout the years, because at the end of the day, they didn't really help to assist to protect the Lebanese people, but actually dragging them into war that will lead to their destruction. But it's really important for me to also add that it's not enough that only the IDF itself will protect Israel. The international community needs to join Israel in a joint forces in order to make sure that not only the resolution 1701 that states that Hezbollah needs to stay about 10 kilometers away from the northern border of Israel and across the Litani River inside of Lebanon, but they also should implement resolution 1559 that states that every non-Lebanese government organization can't hold weapons. Hezbollah is not a Lebanese organization. Hezbollah's affiliation is not to Lebanon. Hezbollah now holds more than 200,000 missiles that are targeting Israeli civilians. And the international community needs to make sure, also the Lebanese themselves, with the help of Israel, needs to make sure that Hezbollah is dismantled from these capabilities, because as Israelis, we will never let Hezbollah do that again. And this is something that we learned from October 7th. We will never let October 7th happen again.
All very, very important information. We do have to wrap up, but I just wanted to ask you really quickly, as part of the Arab-Israeli community, I wanted to ask you how the reaction has been thus far to the historic now release, or rescue, I should say, of the hostage Al-Qadi from Gaza.
The release, once I heard about the release of Qaid Farhan Al-Qadi, I was so full of joy, because at the end of the day, you can see that Israel is doing everything in its power to not just protect all of its citizens, but to make sure that every citizen that are also non-Jewish that were taken by Hamas as captives are back home to their families and relatives, because Israel takes care of all of its citizens. And this is something that is super important for people to understand, that at the end of the day, Israel is this amazing mosaic that has more than 25% of it that are non-Jewish. And all of us are being protected today by Israel from terrorist organizations like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like Iran, like the Houthis in Yemen, like the Islamic resistance in Iraq, and many others that are threatening, at the end of the day, all of Israelis. And we are joyful to see Qaid is back home, and we're really praying to see all of the rest of the 108 hostages that were taken on October 7th by Hamas back home as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Amen. Thank you so much for your insights, Jonathan. Incredibly informative. Stay safe.
Thank you very much, Elori.
The northern border has returned to the daily tit-for-tat exchanges between the IDF and Hezbollah, and Israeli community leaders told the head of the IDF Northern Command they've lost patience with their inability to return home. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Suspected drone infiltration sirens sounded after an explosive-laden drone crossed into Israeli airspace from Lebanon before impacting near the northern community of Beit Hillel, wounding a soldier. Meanwhile, the IDF said it carried out an airstrike against a building in South Lebanon's Odessa after spotting a cell of Hezbollah operatives there. For northern residents, it's back to the routine of living in an area of Israel turned into a war zone. Earlier in the week, the IDF preemptive strike gave some residents hope that the army would continue an offensive and push Hezbollah out of harm's way. it was a pipe dream. After nearly 11 months of rocket fire, residents of the north mostly remain evacuated, and leaders of the northern communities are furious that the mass preemptive strike by the IDF on Hezbollah targets at the start of the week ended as soon as the threat on Tel Aviv was lifted. The head of the IDF Northern Command, Major General Elori, met with the heads of the authorities and councils in the north. Following the summer holiday, schools are due to reopen on September 1st. Northern residents who live south of evacuation lines say there are inadequate provisions for the safety of students, especially while traveling to or from school.
And this morning, for the first time since October 7th, the airport completely shut down. No planes traveled in or out for a couple of hours. ILTV's editor-in-chief Maayan Hoffman is at the airport now. Maayan, what's the situation?
Thank you, Lidar. I'm standing here at Ben Gurion International Airport. The airport is very quiet as a result of the number of flights that have either been canceled or delayed due to the heightened security situation. At around 5:19 this morning, the airport effectively shut down. Any flights that were expected to take off were grounded and sitting on the tarmac, and flights that were incoming were redirected to Ramon Airport in the south. That was while we were attacking Lebanon, and Hezbollah was firing over to us more than 320 rockets and UAVs, some of which we understand were aimed at Tel Aviv. The airport has since resumed flying, but the airport's authorities said that only around 50,000 passengers are expected to go in and out of the airport today on around 320 flights. That is many fewer than what we would normally see this time of year, and that is really impacting our tourism industry, of course, and harming the vacations, the end of the summer, while the kids get ready to go back to school on September 1st. International carriers, as we know, have ceased flying to Israel, some of them indefinitely, and many more until the end of the month, while we wait and we see.
Amid continuing threats of a regional war with Iran or an expanded war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi held key talks with visiting U.S. Commander of the Joint Chief General Charles Brown.
The military leaders of the U.S. and Israel met in the IDF Northern Command, where Halevi said they discussed operational cooperation in the face of challenges and threats in the Middle East.
אנחנו מחזקים את שיתוף הפעולה המבצעי מול האתגרים והאיומים במזרח התיכון. ישראל חזקה ומגנה על עצמה בעצמה, ובכל זאת, תמיד טוב שיש לצידנו בת ברית חזקה שחולקת איתנו ערכים ואינטרסים משותפים.
Halevi said that the IDF will continue hitting Hezbollah hard and that he was determined to return northern residents to their homes as soon as possible.
אנחנו לא עוצרים. לחיזבאללה יש עוד יכולות, והמלאכה עדיין לא הושלמה. המשימה שלנו היא ברורה, להשיב את תושבי הצפון לבתיהם בביטחון, וצה"ל פועל לשם כך מסביב לשעון. אנחנו נחושים להחזיר את תושבי הצפון לבתיהם בביטחון מהר ככל שניתן.
Defense Minister Gallant met Brown and exited saying that Iranian aggression has reached all-time highs, and Israel and the U.S. needed to advance joint capabilities for all theaters of the war. In a clear reference to Iran and Hezbollah, Brown was asked if the immediate risk of a regional war had declined. Brown said, somewhat yes, adding, you had two things you knew were going to happen. One already happened. Now it depends on how the second is going to play out. The tit-for-tat exchanges renewed between Israel and Hezbollah, but at a much lower rate than in recent days. Hezbollah was mostly on the receiving end. Several suspected drones from Lebanon did impact the Upper Galilee without causing injuries. Fighter jets attacked military structures and terror infrastructure in several towns in South Lebanon. IDF forces also attacked with artillery in the areas of Sheba and Eta al-Shab in South Lebanon. A major Hezbollah retaliation for the Israeli assassination of Hezbollah Chief of Staff Fuad Shukr a month ago is apparently behind us. But the 325-day war of attrition between Israel and Lebanon is continuing.
A major counter-terror operation is underway in Samaria. The IDF said forces are operating in the northern Samaria cities of Jenin and Tulkarem. IDF activity was also reported in Nablus as well as Palestinian Arab villages in the Jordan Valley. Military sources say the large-scale counter-terror operation is expected to last several days. The operation is currently focused on the Tulkarm and Jenin areas, with at least 10 Palestinians who have been reported killed so far in clashes and IDF drone strikes, with an additional 15 injured. The army says several wanted terrorists have been detained so far, and more arrests are expected. The operation began yesterday when the IDF eliminated 5 terrorists in a drone strike in Nur Shams, hitting the terrorists' operation room. The operation involves Israel Border Police, the Israel Security Services, and hundreds of IDF troops, along with extensive air support. The operation was triggered by the attempted suicide bombing in Tel Aviv on August 18th. The IDF believes a terror network directed the intended attack from the Tulkarm area. The bomber was named by Hamas as Jafar Mona from Nablus. He was killed when a bomb in his backpack exploded prematurely as he walked down a Tel Aviv sidewalk. One passerby was injured. In Jenin, 3 Palestinian terrorists were eliminated in an airstrike who were posing a threat to troops on the ground, who made arrests and confiscated weapons. Explosives planted under roads were also disarmed by the IDF. Further south, another airstrike eliminated an additional 4 armed terrorists. The Temple Mount is once again at the center of controversy after reports of a proposed state-sponsored tour plan, which some officials deny approving. In addition, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's recent comments about establishing a synagogue on the site have drawn harsh international criticism and calls for action from Saudi Arabia, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. More on this from ILTV's Mayan Hoffman.
The Temple Mount and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir are once again at the center of controversy, both in Israel and internationally. Khan News reports that the Prime Minister's office and the National Security Council have approved a heritage ministry plan to launch state-sponsored guided tours of the Temple Mount. If confirmed, this 2 million shekel plan would allow tens of thousands of Jews and hundreds of thousands of tourists to learn about the Jewish heritage of the site with a more historically accurate narrative. The tours are expected to begin after the holiday season. The Heritage Ministry says they have received approval from all relevant authorities. However, the National Security Council denies approving the plan or even being asked to do so, calling any report of its involvement unfounded. The news comes shortly after Ben-Gvir told Army Radio yesterday that he would be interested in establishing a synagogue on the Mount. In response, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated once again that there is no change in the status quo on the Temple Mount. Despite this, the comment sparked harsh reactions. This morning, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Affairs Ministry condemned the statements, emphasizing that Saudi Arabia opposes the extreme statements and provocations. The ministry called for respecting the historic and legal status of the site and urged the international community to address the humanitarian disaster facing the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority also called on the international community to pressure Israel to end Ben-Gvir's provocative actions and statements. Hamas went further, urging Palestinians to gather at the site to confront the occupation's plans. Currently, the Temple Mount is under the jurisdiction of the Jordanian Waqf, with security handled collaboratively by Jordan and Israeli police. While Jews and Christians are allowed to ascend the Temple Mount, the status quo prohibits them from openly praying there. In recent years, many religious Zionist activists have pushed to change the policy. However, the ultra-Orthodox community opposes such changes, arguing that Jews are strictly forbidden from ascending the Temple Mount for religious reasons at this time.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. Stay safe and see you next week.